Right, so Canada, land of maple syrupy goodness, Ryan Reynolds and a Prime Minister that we haven't forgotten stood up and saluted a literal Nazi, which for many of us meant it was little surprise that Canada has also been supporting and arming Israel whilst committing its genocide of Gaza. But there's been a shift. It's not being widely reported here because frankly it'd make us look bad, and goodness we know our media don't believe in holding our government to account on the international stage. But Canada have gone ahead and made the spoilt brat of nations, Israel, have a toddler tantrum, spit its dummy and stamp its tiny feet in fury because Canada have just opted to ban arms sales to Israel, and that's going to put a lot of political leaders, a lot of other nations in a very difficult position, because by banning arms sales and laying out their justification for doing so now, it's going to be very difficult for other nations to refute that, especially when all of us have been seeing what has been going on out there for months and are pretty much thinking, well, it's about time somebody made a move on this to stop arming Israel. Right, so Canada moved to ban arms sales to Israel, and about time too. Though of course they are not the first to do so. The Netherlands were stopped by court order from continuing to arm Israel, supplying parts for F-35 bombers as they've been doing. Spain and Belgium had already ceased to do so as well, as had Japan, whose Itochu Corporation ended a business partnership it had with Israeli weapons manufacturer Elbit Systems. We've all heard of them, haven't we? Whose factories regularly get protested at here in the UK. And lots of other countries have said they aren't going to buy weapons from Israel any longer too. Yes, they sold them as much as they bought them from the likes of us, but Canada has been a much bigger supplier than those aforementioned. So this has had people made a little bit more aware of it, shall we say. I won't say widely, it's not being covered widely, but of those aware, it has had them sitting up and taking notice because a country like Canada has the capacity to embarrass other large suppliers for continuing to do so as well, such as the US, who supply some 68% of Israel's armaments, Germany, who had increased their supplies to Israel tenfold since the events of October 7th to supply 28% of their armaments, and of course the EU, France, Australia, and certainly us here in the UK as well make up much of the rest of that. Or our government do at any rate. Most of us ordinary folk want it stopped already, of course, but there's been no sign of any desire to do so from either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. Now, it's not like this move has come about as a result of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau having some kind of change of heart, though. He's running a minority government in Canada right now and is reliant on the support of the more left-wing New Democratic Party to prop up his Liberal administration. And it is one of those NDP ministers, Melanie Joly, the Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister, that's been driving this. The NDPs have become somewhat frustrated by Trudeau's failure to do enough to protect civilians in Gaza, so they brought a motion calling for it to be banned, the arms sales. Now, this was a non-binding motion. Press that have been reporting on this are making quite an issue of this being a non-binding motion. It was how it was brought in, though, that makes it relevant, and if Trudeau doesn't make a good on it, given that it passed 204 votes to 117, with the help of some of Trudeau's Liberals at that, along with the Bloc Québécois Party, I bet I've said that wrong, and the Green Party, he might not have a workable minority government, as the NDP can quite easily withdraw its support for it. Such is the power of a hung parliament, folks, at least when the junior partner has some balls, unlike the Lib Dems when they were in coalition with the Tories from 2010 to 2015, of course. The motion also called for Canada to work more proactively towards the establishment of a Palestinian state. So that'll put the cat amongst the pigeons too. Of course, Israel are themselves fuming about this, and as has become customary for them, they are wailing about being victims here and wailing that Canada doesn't care about them, doesn't care about their right to self-defense. What has been going on since October 8th, literally the day after the Hamas incursion, has not been self-defense. It has been devastation of the Gaza Strip from north to south, the destruction of tens of thousands of lives that had nothing to do with Hamas, were for the most part women and children, homes destroyed, infrastructure destroyed, aid convoys targeted, aid workers, aid services, rescue services, medical facilities, charity organisations, foreign aid workers, people displaced. None of this is self-defense. Not one iota of it. It has been an invasion of occupied territory and a genocide. I have a special rock-bottom level of contempt for those squealing self-defence in this, given what that apartheid-occupying state has done. Jolly's Israeli opposite number, though, Israel Katz, has gone there, though. He said, "It is unfortunate that the Canadian government is taking a step that undermines Israel's right to self-defense against the Hamas murderers who have committed terrible crimes against humanity and against innocent Israeli citizens, including the elderly, women and children. History will judge the Canadian government's current move harshly. The State of Israel will continue to fight until Hamas is destroyed and all abductees are returned home." The absolute blinding hypocrisy of that statement should be lost on nobody. You talk about the hostages in Palestine that are held in Gaza by Hamas, but Israel hold 10 times as many Palestinians in their jails. You don't have some divine right to be able to purchase weapons and whine self-defense if you don't get it. You complain about Hamas having killed elderly women and children. There's some dispute on that as to how many of those people on the night of October 7th were actually killed by Israeli forces. But there's no doubt about the women and children in Gaza being killed and who killed them. And as for the elderly there, well, you don't tend to live to get old in Gaza under Israeli occupation, do you? And right now there's over 1 million people holed up in the south of the Strip in Rafah with nowhere to go, and with Netanyahu ignoring every call to not go in there with a military attack, still pledging to do exactly that, though still hasn't happened quite yet. If he does, and I see no reason to think that he's not going to, that cannot in any way, shape or form be considered self-defense on the part of Israel. Not with the casualty rate we would witness. History will judge those harshly who keep arming this regime and hail the bravery of those who are saying no, enough is enough, we aren't arming you and you will stop. Canada is a country that has been getting it wrong but is slowly correcting itself and putting itself on a different path. It is another country that has now resumed funding to UNRWA following the collapse of Israel's lies regarding the aid agency responsible for the distribution of food and aid throughout Gaza, and Israel reacted in much the same way to that action as they do anything else that benefits the Gaza people and not their own barbarism. Here's what an Israeli government spokesperson said when asked what Canadian taxpayers should know about the resumption of funding to UNRWA.
So I think what the taxpayers should know is that their money is funding terror. As simple as that. And do they want their money to help terrorists build tunnels, educate children how to kill and that they should kill, and train them how to do so? Is that the best way for the taxpayers' money to be used? We think that there are much better ways. If we want Gaza to have the bright future that it can't, you can't keep on giving the money to an organization that taught hate, facilitated, and was part of a massacre. And it's not just a few. We have evidence of a lot of people, and there's no way that the people who are running this organization did not know this. So that means that there has to be another solution, and the taxpayers' money should be for a better and future for Gaza, which does not include UNRWA in any way.
What Canadians need to know, taxpayers or not, because it's all public money at the end of the day, is that Israel keep making claims about evidence, but haven't been able to present one scrap of it. That's literally why funding is resumed. Israel would not pony up this supposed evidence they have. Without it, without the support, the funding, UNRWA would collapse. Aid distribution around Gaza would collapse. People who are already starving to death would do so in even greater numbers. If Israel was so concerned about this funding of terrorism, they would have presented their evidence by now. They simply don't have any. Of course they don't. They have no justification to do what they are doing or saying what they are saying regarding UNRWA and the majority of Gazan people. They've just become so accustomed to being allowed to do whatever they like that at this point of genocide, where some countries are now trying to set boundaries where previously none have been applied, they're clicking out and just making stuff up to try and get their own way. It is a spoilt brat administration acting like thugs and making up every excuse going to justify what they are doing in Gaza. And now they've had their guns stopped from Canada, it's like they've had their pocket money stopped. At least that's the reaction. Fair play to Canada for finally reaching a point where they are starting to do the right thing. It might have been forced by a minority governmental partner, but if it's what works, it's what works. It's very much true that it is better late than never. We just need other nations, much bigger suppliers, to reach that same point, to make a meaningful difference that will turn the tide here. If nothing else, Canada's high profile is going to be a bigger source of embarrassment and shame on those nations still trying to excuse supplying Netanyahu's insane regime. It's not just the Gazan people who are being targeted and killed in this genocide, though, but also far too many people trying to report on what is going on there. They are dying too, but not just being killed, but also arrested, detained, and beaten, as this story will tell you all about, going grossly underreported, even though this is happening to journalists. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.